I'm going to call to order the meeting, a special meeting of the Brawley City Council and successor agency to Brawley Community Redevelopment Agency. This is our special meeting agenda for October 14th, 2021 at 6 p.m. here in City Council chambers. I'd like to have the roll call.
The minutes will reflect all council members present.
Thank you, Alma. I'm looking for an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Item 2, public appearances and comments not to exceed 4 minutes. This is the time for the public to address the council on any item not appearing on the agenda that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the City Council. Is there anyone here for public comment? No, seeing none. We'll move on to item 2D. This is a presentation, a review of the economic analysis for the City of Brawley presented by Urban 3.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just have a little short intro to kick it off, and then we'll hand it over to Urban 3. As you're all aware, back in February, March of this year, the city engaged Urban 3 to perform an economic analysis on all real property within the city limits. Just as a refresher, Urban 3 is a consulting firm specializing in land value economics, property tax analysis, and community design. Urban 3 analyzes the fiscal impacts of differential patterns of development down to the level of individual parcels, but at the scale of entire communities. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Joseph Minakazi, principal of Urban 3. It's all yours, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for taking us on to do this analysis. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And let me know if you see this and if you have problems, if it stops or anything, just tell me. I speak in pictures. This is how we present our information. I'm going to go through a really brief, it looks like there's a little bit of a delay. I'm already 3 slides in and it's not moving. Let me try something else. All right, is it moving at your end?
There is a, looks like a LP record player for those discs there that is in the middle of.
Yeah, okay, let me just do a different way. I don't understand why it's not doing that. It's showing that I'm sharing the screen, but it's not rotating for some reason. Yeah, you're right. I can see your monitor from here, actually. Let's see, I'll try a different way here.
Inception.
Right.
Which version of Zoom are you using?
Mondo.
Mondo Zoom?
Not coming in, not working. The best laid plans of mice and men.
Yes, indeed.
64.
5.7.
5.7.
Atari 1500.
We also, as a last resort, we do have it on the M drive where we could get it in a PDF form. Oh, but it appears it's working.
It's still hanging out.
Where you could ask, okay, if.
Let me go ahead and try doing it with a PDF at my end, and then if that doesn't work,
Mr. Mayor, why don't we just take a little 3-minute recess?
As you know, it's a big show, so.
We're going to take it through.
Okay, we'll take a break while they
We'll take a break while they work.
take care of the technical side of it.
Ready to go?
Okay.
Yep.
Yep, I think so.
Okay. So, just for the audience and for those of them that haven't seen our work before, we do GIS, or Geographic Information Systems Analytics. It's basically putting data on a map and digitizing it so people can see what's going on from a productivity standpoint, which is something that you all should be very familiar with in our agricultural community. And when farmers do analysis, they typically do economic analysis about crop yield per acre, water per acre, all of that stuff, labor per acre, and it's a mathematical model. So we just recommend doing the same with cities. This is a building, I used to work for a real estate developer. This is a building that we rehabbed that went from a $300,000 taxable value to $11 million. So the taxes went up 3,500%. When people saw this, they compared it to like a Walmart is 20 million, which is double the value of this. But it's really an apples to oranges argument because this is on 0.5 acres versus the Walmart on 34 acres. So that when you stack it up, this building's 100 times more productive, property tax-wise. It's double the retail taxes. And the joke that I usually make with people is that the Walmart's 20 million, it's like growing wheat, while our building is like growing cannabis or something. It's a cash crop. So when you stack up the dollars, you see the value. Josh McCarty, who's on this call, the analyst on this project, pointed out this is something you're very familiar with, and the stunning facts of the production that comes from the Imperial County, that 25% of the lettuce in the entire country comes from your county. This big purple spike in the middle is downtown. Those are our buildings downtown. We have some pretty big buildings downtown, but they're not mile-high buildings. I think the tallest building in our city is 16 stories. You can also see our little cousin of Black Mountain over here, which is a community of 12,000 people. Their tallest building was 3 stories, and you can see it still has a little peak to it. So that urban form, it's real simple. Density and design gives you value. Or if you waste all the real estate and do really big surface parking lots with cheap buildings, it's going to have low value. And that is all how the tax system works at a really simple level. For you all, obviously you're in California. Your tax system is a little bit different than ours. If we like to explain taxes simply, we also have to learn the tax system every state that we go into. So we sort of make this dummies guide for ourselves to understand your tax system. Because we're from North Carolina, our system is pretty simple. We have a market value that gets a taxable reduction. It's kind of simple, and then it gets once you have your taxable value, the only thing that we get to mess with locally is our tax rate to get a tax bill. As you all know, you have Prop 13. It makes things complex. You have homestead exemptions and other exemptions that come off the top of your market value that we don't have in our state. We have some, but they're pretty restrictive. That gets your net taxable value. Then you have a tax limit based on 1% of your ad valorem special assessment rates per 100,000, and your tax rate is based per 100,000 as well. There's a bunch of policies that are essentially commingled into what is Prop 13, is the kind of the general moniker for your tax system. But the way that it nets out is that that's how you do your math to get your tax bill, basically. For $300,000 of market value in the county, it's going to pull $300,000 for both residential and commercial, so it's straight up. But then you get your homestead exemption if you have a house. Commercial doesn't have that. You have your tax cap at 1%, which is going to basically inflect back on your tax bill. So you see that it's a small separation, 3,000 to 930 for commercial versus residential. And in the city, that's a county system, and the way that works out. So your county bill would be 3,000 versus 2,900. When you go through the city and do the same thing, you still have the homestead exemption. You have special assessments. These are policies that you apply to yourselves. They could be special assessment districts or things that you're paying for, but those will affect your tax rate. And then you have a total rate cap of 0.1705% to equal a tax bill of $511 to $499. Again, still a split, similar to what you saw in the county, but a lot less tax comes to your city. Your county gets, as we saw, let's just jump back to that for a second. Your county gets $3,000 for commercial, $2,900, and for the city, it's it's $500 and $400. So about say a sixth the taxes for commercial go to the city versus the county. But a resident's total tax bill would be at $3,500. So that is, for the citizen, they need to know that the majority of this goes to the county. From a tax standpoint, this is your county at a total value standpoint. So you see a lot of darker parcels, non-taxables in gray, so you have a lot of desert around you that's non-taxable. Green is low value, purple is high value. But again, this is total value or miles per tank, if you will. When you say value per acre, that changes to this. So now you start to see the heat in the cities. And then let's just show it to you in 3D so you can see that. And you can see Brawley, Imperial, El Centro, and Calexico at the border here. And you can pretty much tell from here where the downtowns are and these little purple centers in all of them. And this is kind of zoom in to them so you can see them closer in. So this is basically you and your cousins along 111 down to Mexico. Zooming into the city and doing the same thing, this is the total value map of your city. And again, you see the large parcels by the tracks that are super potent. When you say value per acre, it shifts. You do see some heat come toward the center. You see some heat at the edge with residential. That's an effective Prop 13 because there's probably more recent transactions out there that do that. This is your city in 3D. And we'll come back to the Prop 13. It's easier to tell if you look at the old neighborhoods in here and you can see that they're sort of yellowish, which puts it around the average of about $750,000 an acre. The newer neighborhoods are pulling in at $3 million. But that's all going to be an effective transaction or the luck of transaction. So if you do recycle, if people do purchase houses, and you can see in here, you can tell where people are buying up houses and there's new transactions in the older neighborhoods because you see it pop up to red in there. So that's just the function of Prop 13, where you, as you all know, you get this reset that happens in the tax value. And just to highlight, there's the Walmart down there compared to residential around it. So the Walmart's not doing so well from a property tax value standpoint. There's two factors there. One is the size of the parcel with a large parking lot, that lowers the value, but also it's really not an expensive building. It's about a $50 square foot building. Now into your, this is kind of hovering over your city, and you can see this center spine through the city here, and basically looking at the top of the model. When you get into Main Street, this is your total value per acre. So you can see that shift of lower value to some heat in the downtown, and this is looking over the model. There's really not a pattern here. You can tell where the renovations have happened, obviously, this big purple spike right here. But there's a general, I wouldn't call it a stagnation, it's kind of locked into a time period in here. There is an opportunity to grow it up because of the density in that area, particularly for the two-story buildings. But we'll come back to that in a second. Now here's your downtown just standing alone by itself, and Josh turned off the rest of the city so you can just see it in isolation. And then this is, again, hovering over your downtown in context of your city, so you can see that potency, but also there's some, like the little green areas in here are very low production. Now, I think what I would look at this as is that those green parcels, or even the gray parcels, which are publicly owned parcels, maybe not this square, but there are parcels in here that could be could be redeveloped and you could get that value. So see the higher spikes as the potential in this area because you're clearly getting it. So think of it, this is your fertile soil or your garden that could be tended. Countywide, you're looking at about, a big chunk of your county is non-taxable, which is typical of a lot of counties around, we saw this in San Bernardino, up the way, but around deserts or mountains, you find a lot of non-taxable land. When you get into the city, you're about 19% non-taxable, which is kind of average. I wouldn't say that it's low or high. It's about average. When you get into your downtown, it's about 25%. Again, this is not all that surprising or shocking, particularly when you have a main square in the center of your city. But it's not too abnormal. Asheville, for instance, we have 44% non-taxable in our downtown. For a couple of factors, we're a county seat, so we have the county buildings, we have state buildings, federal buildings, and we also have a lot of churches in our downtown, and we also have a big downtown compared to you. But that's just a number to give you. When you look at your the county and the productivity of your city to the county, your city is pulling 10% of the area of the county, so as Imperial County taxpayers, y'all take up about 10% of the room, the county. You're less than 1% of the tax production, but that's a 1 to 22 ratio of productivity when you do the math on that. For the footprint that you take up and then the punch that you give in the county taxes, you're actually a pretty solid producer of county taxes as a city, if you will, and that's good. When you look at your city in your downtown the same way, so your downtown is a subcomponent of your city, those numbers are about a 1 to 2 of area to value. That's a little on the low side. Generally speaking, you want to shoot for, and maybe this is a goal that you could set with your general plan or policies. A healthy downtown is going to be somewhere around a 1 to 6. Maybe for you all, for your county and your economic condition that the county's in, 1 to 4 would be a nice place to be to grow that productivity and focus on that. Because generally speaking, downtowns produce a lot of wealth for communities. So that's something to work on. Not to neglect the fact that your downtown is a piece of the county, which doesn't even show up. Josh highlights it right here. But even what it is, now remember your city is 1 to 22, your downtown is 1 to 43 for the county from an area to value standpoint. So that's good. That's a really potent downtown for the county. So it may be worth cooperating with the county and talking with them. As you work on your downtown, it's going to only give them more wealth too. And oftentimes what we find is that folks that are advocating for downtowns tend to leave the county out of the conversation. So it would help to do that. And Josh went ahead and ran the downtowns of your cousins, just so that you can see how they stack up. You're actually doing better than Imperial on the downtown and El Centro. Wow. The only one that's got a more potent downtown is Calexico out of their family of downtowns. So something to be aware of. And also there's a lot of cities you can I want to say steal, but you could replicate what other communities are doing. So whatever's happening in El Centro from an infill standpoint or downtown revitalization, you can learn from. Or sorry, Calexico, So going through some examples of, let's say, the ingredients of your city. You've got a bunch of Walmarts in your county, and we like to always use the Walmarts. Your average Walmart's about $700,000 of value. The Brawley Walmart, you can see behind my cursor here, is $600,000. So your Walmart is pulling about $100,000 an acre of value less than average. But it's just, think of this as a control subject. It's just, everybody's got a Walmart, so we'd always use these boxes as an example. So that when you get to residential land use, we're going to go ahead and leave the Walmart in the bottom of the slide down here, just so that you can see how other building types produce compared to the Walmart. So single family on average, countywide, is about $900,000, where Walmart's $600,000. So single family is more potent than the Walmart. When you get into multifamily, that averages out, or sorry, single family in your city, you're at about $800,000. So you're about $100,000 less than countywide. Countywide is 900, y'all are 850. And when you get into your multifamily, now you're at about $1 million for your multifamily. And we'll get into some more specific examples of these in your community, but just so you know, multifamily is more productive than single family from a value standpoint. However, countywide, when you do multifamily, it does jump up to almost $2 million. And again, this is a matter of finding these examples that are clearly there's a market for that value in your community, and it's happening countywide. So how do you make this happen in Brawley to bring up your value is a question that we would have. And then finally, you get into some historic buildings in your community. Ciudad Plaza, this is right now at 2.4 million per acre, which is quite good. And then you can see a similar building scale, if you will, mixed-use building, Worthington Square, with ground story commercial and upper story residential. It's got 34 units an acre of density. It's 0.5 million of value per acre. And it's really simply a function of, if you put a lot of building on the small site, you're going to get a lot of value. It's going to get a lot of production off that property for a modest amount of street footage, which is the infrastructure we have to pay for. There's a term, Dan Paralek in San Francisco, a firm called Opticos has made popular, called missing middle, which is the architecture types that used to happen in most cities when they grew up. You find these all, particularly in California, the bungalow courts, little mixed multifamily or maybe duplexes, quadplexes. These were all commonplace in the 1920s to World War II, and we effectively sort of zoned them out of existence. But when you look at the values of them, 600,000, $1 million, 1.6 million, 1.5 million, 600,000. These are all typologies that you have in your community that you could replicate them, you know what they look like. For a lot of modern American cities that grew mostly after World War II, they don't even know what these things are. But this is how we used to build cities. They would mix right in with the housing, the single-family housing, and it was a good place to have multi-generational housing, but also affordable housing for folks. But they're also quite potent. So that's the housing side, some mixed-use stuff. Now we get into commercial. Although we started with the Walmart, you can see other boxes. The Days Inn in Brawley is not doing so well at 100,000, so it's like 1/6 the value, let's say 1/5 the value of the Walmart from a production standpoint. Dollar Tree is about 500,000, again less productive. The Costco is about 500,000. Your Lowe's is 700,000. Now we'll come back to this because there is retail taxes that come with this, but generally speaking, the boxes just don't perform from a property tax standpoint, and that is basically a function of the architecture. When you get into Target, Targets are typically way more value than Walmart. I don't know if it's a bias in the tax system. I don't know if usually Walmart's a little bit more aggressive about arguing their tax bills, but this is pretty common. Target's going to be almost double at Walmart. The smaller boxes, the fast food joints tend to be more value too, at 1.4 million for Carl's Jr. This is the Rio Vista Shopping Center at 1.2 million, and then the Imperial Valley Mall at about a little over 1.2 million, or about double Walmart. One of the things that we noticed in your history is this sort of lasting value that you have that your great-grandparents left for you that's part of your downtown. We're going to come back and look at some of these, but basically think about these architectural typologies that have had several different lives in your community, which means that they keep on giving you taxes as opposed to single-use structures that don't. But around your commercial core, you're seeing this at 3.4 million. This is 3.7 million for McDonald's. These aren't bad numbers. And then this is Kentucky Fried Chicken at 4 million. Just an office building on Main Street at 6 million, or about 10 times a Walmart production.
That's where that spike was at.
And Josh went ahead and highlighted those in the model so you can see where they are. There's a couple of functions here. One is the newness of it. That's going to trigger a higher value set because it triggers the Prop 13 effect where it's resetting at a higher level. And then also the density. They're small buildings on small sites. They're still dense. But here's just highlighting them in the model and how they stick out. They stick out like pixie sticks sticking through the model. This is Garland's at $6 million. So compared to it's about $2 million more production than the Kentucky Fried Chicken. This is La Boucherie Drive office building. It's got a little parking in the front of this building, but it's a pretty dense building at about $6 million. Your Jack in the Box is $6 million. Your Starbucks is $6.5 million. Your Walgreens is $6.5 million. And your, I don't know if I can pronounce this properly, but Fresenius, the kidney office is about $6 million for this medical center. So those are the building types and what they do. And Josh went ahead and highlighted them. Now remember, these are outside your city, but they could be in your city if you can find a way to replicate those building types. But they are essentially the high performers throughout your cousins, if you will. We do these charts here. I'm not going to go through all of this. I'm just going to highlight what you're looking at. This is a bar chart showing everything that you've just seen. And what we like to do is give our clients just a simple way of holding up a chart and looking at it. And then you can see how they stack up side by side. So this is a very graphic way of seeing everything from the days in over here on the left to the Fresenius Kidney Care Facility over here on the right. So you can see how different they all are. Now from a color standpoint, residential, single-use residential stuff is in blue. Single-use commercial stuff is in red. What's notable is you have two pretty large commercial properties, the Days Inn and the Brawley Walmart, but they're way down here at this end of the chart, behind residential. You've got your middle of the pack stuff, and then you start to notice where you see your jump right here. It starts to happen at Ciudad Plaza because it's mixed use, and again over here at Worthington Square. And again, these are single-use boxes that are predominantly new. We tend to see, usually in our experience, we usually see mixed-use stuff all hanging out at the far right. It's surprising to see commercial at the far right, but I think that's a function of the economic conditions of your marketplace more than anything else. Not to say that you can't get more density and more housing. I think Worthington Square can probably be replicated. It's a matter of finding the developer that's willing to come in and do that. And we'll talk about this later, but I'm going to mention a group. There's a group called the California Infill Builders that do go out and try to do housing. They have their own financing. And the hard part that they have is having a willing community that's willing to work with them to find sites and help them through the process. As you know, California tends to be notorious for really difficult processes with CEQA and everything like that. You may not have that problem in your community, which I would take advantage of finding those developers, and we can pass that information on to you. Just to do some comparisons of how much of this equals that. So taking your old bungalow courts on G Street, the taxes paid per acre are about 14, let's call it 15,000 per acre. The Salton Village apartments are only pulling about $6,000 of taxes per acre. So if you had 1.6 acres of this building on the left, it would equal the 4-acre Salton Village. So think of it from the standpoint of once that site gets bigger, that means you have more frontage and more expense, more cost of infrastructure. So if you can make the same amount of money on using less land, that's going to be cheaper for you from an infrastructure standpoint. Taking one of your grand old ladies, an old drugstore that's been in your community forever, this is pulling about $23,000 an acre for the Red Cross Pharmacy. Compare that to the Carl's Jr., which comes out good from value per acre standpoint, but it's only pulling about $17,000 in taxes per acre. So about a fourth of an acre of the white drugs would equal the half acre Carl's Jr. So that's more potent than this. When you get into the Fresnes, which is the one that's the high producer down in Calexico, 1.7 acres of that would equal the 19-acre Walmart in Brawley from an apples-to-apples standpoint. So that's a highly potent building. And it doesn't look it when you see the picture or if you just drove by it, but it's pretty potent. So that's an interesting find. And then, this building, the Ciudad Plaza, pulling about $29,000 of taxes per acre. Compare that to the $2,000 of taxes per acre that Rio Vista is producing. 0.6 acres of that building, which is essentially the site that it sits on, would equal the 9-acre shopping plaza. So if you just doubled this building, you would equal all of this. Sorry, this building sits on 0.3 acres. So if you had two of them, it would equal all of this 9-acre Ciudad Plaza. Another thing that we talked about in-house is there's a parking lot that you all own that is literally the size of Ciudad Plaza. So it's land that you own. You could leverage that redevelopment opportunity and get that taxes. So right now it's producing zero taxes for you, and you could get $28,000 an acre, $29,000 an acre off that site. Now granted, I don't know how frequently used that parking is, if that's like a prime site, but it is an opportunity to have control over the property. So looking at the Ciudad Plaza against Rio Vista, just as an area standpoint, if you had two sites, it would equal all of that in area. And going to something a little bit more potent, like Worthington, which is producing about $57,000 an acre of taxes, and comparing it against something that's potent in itself, which is, remember, the mall is twice a Walmart in potency. It's producing $8,000 in taxes per acre, but 9.5 acres of this Worthington Square would equal the 68-acre mall. And I understand they're totally different buildings, but we're just doing this to be provocative, if you will, to kind of say, think about it. Think about your land. It's pretty sacred. So this is the Worthington Square side by side with the mall to show you how little you need to develop to equal all of that land area. The other thing that we're thinking about is, your Imperial Hardware store, which was built in the 1940s, is now the healthcare facility. Actually, I think I have it back here. I'm going to mess up Josh's show. So this building was born in a long time ago and is still being used. Where what's the life of the modern architectural hardware store? So be aware of this. This is producing, the Rio Vista is producing 2,000, while the old hardware store is producing 8,000. So that old building has been producing way more property taxes from a potency standpoint, but also for generations. So do think about, as you go forward, what kind of legacy do you leave your grandkids? Because your great-grandparents have actually left you some pretty strong buildings and some strong wealth. So there it sits in your downtown at $8,000 an acre, so 2.2 acres of the old hardware store, the old Ace, would equal the 9.3 acres new Ace hardware store. Just doing hardware store to hardware store as a comparison. So that's the building types. We ran several other analytics, your employment data, who you're importing and exporting, and who you're retaining. So you all retain about, let's call it 2,600 people, live and work in Brawley. You import about 3,000 people from neighboring, out in the county, neighboring towns or cities. Those are people that come in for work, and you export about 7,000. So that's showing us that you have a broad residential population that you're sending away to other employment. Now that could be other cities, it could be farms.
Well, we know farms, we know that, and also Central government.
but that's your statistical number. When you put it on a map, you do send a big chunk of people.
For people that do
to
like
El
home
Centro.
inspections outside of Brawley.
Some people actually go to San Diego, which was kind of surprising. Now again, this doesn't show the farm workers, this is showing what communities they go to. But 27% of Brawley residents work in Brawley, 44% work in other locations, just as a sweeping number. In our conversations with Tyler, one of the things that we wanted to get into is who owns Brawley. Is it owned from people within Brawley or outside? So that we ran a series of analytics, just looking and comparing mailing address to property address. But and when you look at your core area, your downtown, you're looking at 64% of your downtown. It actually has a mailing address in Brawley. So about 36% is some outside property owner. Now, what we don't have here is if that is owned by, like if the mailing address goes to, you know, Mr. whoever attorney's office, that's going to show up as a local address for us. So we don't have the ability to, like, it would take a bit to dig deeper into this. This was just like a real quick CAT scan to test that question. So you can see that there's some outside bank buildings, office buildings. The Community Value Bank is owned by somebody outside Brawley. Ciudad Plaza is a local person. El Sol Marketplace across the street is outside of Brawley. They may be old Brawley residents. We don't know. But you know, this is just a really simple test. So also for your downtown, we kind of went outside of that and looked at your city as well. Citywide, you're looking at about 55% of the land area is outside of Brawley. What was pretty telling here is you look to the east and you can see large tracts of land that are essentially owned by holding companies. That's, you know, in some communities they exploit agricultural exemptions and just sit there and wait for future development. But you know, you have to just look at that. It's you're about 50-50 owned by Brawley and owned outside of Brawley when you look at your city. But you can see the majority of the residential is pretty locally owned. It would be worth digging deeper. I don't know if you're being hit by institutional investors, but nationwide, from the people that own outside of Brawley for the residential stuff, and you can see it's kind of peppered along in here. But there's like CalPERS Teachers Pension Fund has actually become a big player in buying single-family housing as a whole, because single-family housing performs really well. So you're starting to see different forms of money, but I don't think it's as bad or as hot in your community as it is in, let's say, Marin County or San Francisco or something like that, where there's really high pressure on the housing market. We have that problem here in Asheville, actually, because of the tourism market. But just to highlight a couple of properties, obviously KFC, McDonald's, and we saw earlier the Community Bank and Main Street. You see this yellow finger coming out of downtown on the left, tends to be outside of Brawley. And then this is just looking at the whole city. And we did this in 3D so you can see the potency. So even though they may be outside owners, you know, Josh put it in 3D, but you can see you're actually taxing them pretty high too. So I don't know if that's good or bad. It's just this is what the data is. This could also be a challenge for locally owned property, is how do you build up their wealth on their properties as well and keep them as residents in your community. But these are all, hopefully these maps will stimulate that conversation. And Josh, if I'm missing anything along the way, just go ahead and chime in. The other thing that we do with all of the analyses is we did your property taxes. This is showing how all the different states operate. We have this data, so we just go ahead and share it with y'all. But California, red is property tax. This is how local governments are financed. When I say local governments, I'm saying local is city and county combined. So the two of you combined are mostly funded off property taxes. There's retail taxes in light green, and then the dark green is sort of, or blue is sort of transfers from state, transfers from county, other funds that come through, could be federal trickle down. But for the majority speaking, you mostly can control property because you have zoning. Retail sales taxes are usually tied to the wealth of your community. And the outside contributions, you don't know what Sacramento is going to do. But anyway, you're kind of in the middle of the cluster. On the left, you see that Connecticut, Maine, New England states tend to be pretty solidly property tax driven. And as you go to the right of this chart, you see southern states like Oklahoma, Louisiana, Alabama, and Arkansas run predominantly off retail sales tax, which is not, I wouldn't call that smart, because what ends up happening is when a recession hits, people don't buy a TV or they don't buy a boat or a truck or something. So all of a sudden you lose money and you can't afford your city. Retail tends to be more volatile than property tax. But we did do your retail sales tax analysis anyway. And Josh ran your numbers on, we have, by state law rules, we're not allowed to just show what the Walgreens does versus the Walmart. What we can do is we can draw a boundary that physically feels like the area of how people generally care about their community. So there's the downtown versus the strip out by the highway or the mall area. We can't actually do the mall as one unit. We're not allowed to show individual stores in the mall. One of the things that, as we were talking through, Josh pointed out, is that, well, we should show a chart of what are those properties that produce sales tax. So the gray stuff doesn't produce it. The green stuff does. So this is just for your citizens to know that, yes, you are a property taxpayer, but those businesses are essentially milling the sales tax. Now that is coming from your resident. It's coming from your consumers, your citizens in the community that are spending in the community. But the retail sales generation is happening at those point of sales. So bear in mind, you're going to start to see a shift in how we do the model here. We've gone from parcel to parcel to how we could show property tax, which is more by those clusters. So this is property tax, and then laying the sales tax out. So you see how it's in kind of a little bit more boxy in less individual parcels, but this is sales tax. Oops. What did I do there? This is the property tax, this is the sales tax, and here it is with the sales tax stacked on top of the property tax. So this is basically how you feel financially. The Walmart, you can see down here, makes a lot more sales tax than it does in property tax. You can see that down where my cursor is. But you can see your main core of your city is pretty potent. It sticks up pretty high. That's where most of your transactions are happening. There may be a lot of sales at that Walmart, but again, given the size and area of it, it's not as productive as your spine. It's all those little transactions that add up. And then this is a chart showing the taxable sales per acre. So there's a lot more taxable sales happening in the Walmart than, let's say, the objects around it. But still, along 78 over to 86, you're seeing a pretty big rise in it. When I say enhanced, what Josh had to do is, this is how it feels if you just look at it as a portfolio. But when we bring it over to the property tax, we had to kind of knock it down some to catch up with the property tax, which is why it looks a lot flatter here. Your property tax is your big producer to pay attention to in your community. Anyhow, so the other thing that you asked us to do was look at your infrastructure and your roads. This is going to be a little. It's not going to animate, but taking all of your roads and squeezing them all together, your roads equal a big parking lot this big. So if you were to just think about that for a second, this is what you own as roads. So you have to rebuild that every 50 years, and that's a pretty sizable area of asphalt. So it's also a stormwater runoff issue, but you don't have storms a lot. But still, when they happen, that stuff has to find its way out. Taking your roads and stretching them end to end, you have enough roads to go from Brawley to Palm Desert. That's what you own. And so think of it this way: every 50 years, you're building a road from Brawley to Palm Desert. This actually isn't bad. I mean, I know that looks bad, but we've seen worse. So Josh stacked you up against some of the other cities that we have, so that you can see that you have more roads per square foot, 25 feet per person, versus South Bend. But you have less than Lancaster, California, which is just northwest from you. And you have a lot less than us here in Asheville. So there's not a magic number here, it's just using this as a metric and being aware of it, but also being aware of the consequences of roads. And you also have this pattern that you seem to have developed, this kind of grid pattern, and you really haven't changed much from it, even though you've added people. So your population in 1960, kind of move this out of the way, was 12,000, you had 39 miles of road, you doubled your population, about 2.1 increase on your population. And you didn't go too crazy with your roads, it's about a 2.2 increase in roads. It's still more than your population increase, but that's not bad from a road standpoint. So just so you know, we looked at that. Now when the roads get built, this is the life cycle of the road. So if we take a look at this black line up here, that's the road, and then once I as a developer put that road down, I'm essentially passing off maintenance that happens every single year. From our data sources and our analysis, we generally say it's about $100 per lane mile is what should go into ongoing maintenance. It's going to depend on where you are. It's going to depend on, for in your case, the sun exposure and the heat indexing versus, let's say, Minnesota somewhere where they have to deal with snow and freeze-thaw cycles. Every 10 years, you're supposed to do a millage or resurfacing where they scrape off the top and relay down the asphalt to refresh it. And then after the fourth cycle of that, that's when you get into the reconstruction, which is essentially scraping it down and getting into the foundation of it and rebuilding from the bottom up. That's the more expensive one. But per lane mile, you're looking at $300,000 every millage cycle and about $800,000 for the full cycle. Now, once you do that, then you start the process all over again. So in year 60, you're back to the first mill hit. But as a rule of thumb, generally think of $1 million per lane mile that you need to budget for ongoing replacement, reserve, and maintenance of each road. It's not cheap. Oftentimes, developers build the roads, they give them to communities, and they say they're free. Well, they're not free. They're an ongoing liability for communities. So at your 85 miles of road, you're looking at about, you should have in maintenance and reserve about $8 million a year is your cost of roads of what you have. So just use that. That's sort of a number to hang on to. Or another way of thinking of it, if this is your budget and you're currently spending $17 million, that's half your budget that should be going to roads. So when you shove that into your road system, you really should be operating with a $25 million budget. Now that can be fine-tuned. This could take more conversation with your public works director, but this is not anything to take lightly. Roads are expensive, and it's a habit that we've gotten into with every American city to kind of, I won't say neglect it, but we kick the can down the road, and it's getting more and more expensive. A lot of the roads, like I showed you earlier, for a lot of cities that had massive expansion after World War II or in the 60s and 70s, they're in way worse condition than you are. So we've seen worse. So your capital spending plan calls for $28 million. You're averaging about $2.8 million a year of spending. And basically your sources of funds are from sales tax. You're taking about debt or bonds that you're paying for with sales tax. You get gas taxes from the state, and you get state and federal grants for about $1 million a year. California is very prescriptive about funding for capital projects. So your state outlines the state contributions, gas taxes, and it's basically allocated based on people. So if you add more density, you can get more of the state funding for revenue. So the best thing in California you can do is add people without adding roads. because then you get more money from the state. It's based on people, not lane miles. Let's see. Yeah, turn these off. So when you look at your roads, you're looking at, if just as a really crude example, you've got $8 million that your roads are desiring as a diet. You're putting about $3 million in. So you're operating at a $5 million deficit per year. Or if you want to take all of your money and sort of the way that you're operating this and flush it into the system and say, where do you run out of money with your roads? And Josh did this as just a sort of as a graphic to show you if you flush your money in, you just run out. And so you can afford about 36% of your road system in your current financial situation. This isn't intended to be a scary graphic. This is intended to give you a real honest understanding of why most cities can't afford everything they want. And roads, you can push them. You could skip a maintenance cycle. They're forgiving that way, but it only gets worse further down the road because that reconstruction gets more complicated, which makes it more expensive. Think of it as brushing your teeth. If you brush your teeth every day and keep them up, you're in much better condition than if you just choose not to and you just have a root canal when you're like 21. You know, and so you can complicate your infrastructure through maintenance. And then this is showing you how you stack up next to the peers that we've seen where we run this number. You are at a higher deficit. You also have, in your defense, a lower level of revenue coming in than other places. You just don't have the wealth that a lot of cities that we see, particularly places like Eugene. South Bend is doing all right because they were a very wealthy city at one point in time, and they have a lot of density in their city, and they also didn't grow as fast as a lot of Sunbelt places. They didn't take on, they basically peaked in 1960. That was the best year ever, and then they've been declining ever since. So if you look at South Bend in 1960, it's super awesome, but they have added more roads than people, and it's declined. So if South Bend would just stayed where they were in 1960, they'd be much better than they are today. Asheville, we have our own problems. We've tragically underfunded our roads in our community for generations. We're doing well because we have tourism and high value import money, but we're still not keeping up with our roads. So again, it's just, this is a common problem in American cities. So let's see, I can't get this animation to work. One of the other things about roads that was stuck out for us, and we've had this conversation with Tyler about this, and this is a development that you probably all know. There's this development that happened that crashed. So here's what's out there. You know, you've got the roads out there. You don't have the houses. So this is a liability. So you have about 10,000 feet of road, which would be a yearly cost at those numbers that I showed earlier, about $174,000. You've got 25 lots that are built upon. So 25 taxpayers that are paying some taxes. Now, the vacant lots are paying taxes too, but it's a whole lot less taxes because they're building on it. And that's a sizable amount. So be cautious of developments that come in, or at least before new developments come in, think it up. Make sure that you're getting this stuff filled up. Because this is a net loss of $158,000 that you're picking up on this project, or our estimate. Or another way of looking at it, even if it's fully built out, you're going to still be a net loser of $16,000, which isn't as bad as what you're currently in, but still, this is just not going to keep up with the road liability that's out there. And so just to recap, how can you meet this gap? How can you get rid of this deficit? There's basically a point that I mentioned earlier. You can add more people without adding roads. You can increase taxes. You can increase fees. Come up with like a road fee or other forms of fees, or find other forms of fees that you can turn into fees and use that general fund to slide over into roads. You can reduce road costs by just not maintaining them. You can just let some revert to dirt, or just cut some off that you don't want and just let it go. Or you can add value. You can add increases. So Josh ran through some examples of, with each of these, what would it look like. So let's say you had to add more people. If you just went with adding more people, you would need to add 45,000 people to catch up to where you are, which is not going to be easy, because that's like the population of El Centro. You're just to show you the scale of how behind the curve you are. But as you add more people, that's going to be better for you. So adding people helps. And you know, we just went ahead and this is what you look like right now as a population cluster. This is what you would have to pop up to, just to put them side by side. This is a map of all the population all the way to Los Angeles, to show you how you'd have to stick up. It's not going to be easy to do that. Taxes have issues because of Prop 13. It's a little bit more restrictive. There's also a really weird paradigm that happens with taxes, where it's you know, and we did this. We didn't have the data to do this in North Community, but we did this in Santa Rosa in Sonoma County, where we highlighted just recent transactions. So this is countywide. One of the things that happens in California, ironically enough, because of Prop 13, is all that new housing tends to come in at the edge of the city, which actually extends infrastructure. So it's actually not, it's not beneficial growth. You're getting a higher tax value out of that stuff than its neighbors, but it's coming with more infrastructure. Or let's go into the city so you can see it a little bit better. So you see this kind of fire that's out here at the edge, where that's all Prop 13 stuff, and you can see the older housing down here in yellows and greens. So just looking at the Prop 13, sure enough, it's like all the new stuff at the edge. Now, if you squint a little, you can see the new buildings that come into the downtown are way more potent. And it's one of the things we talked to Santa Rosa about, is we said, look, you should pay attention to these little buildings that are happening downtown, because they're like 10 times the potency of the Prop 13 stuff that's happening, the new housing that's happening at the edge. But it's not, it's undeniable that those larger developments are more potent. It just comes with more infrastructure. Into the center of the city now, seeing the Prop 13 impact. One of the things that we were talking about, you can see this neighborhood right here is all hot. That's Prop 13. You can also see the older neighborhoods in the center. So just to highlight a couple, looking at Julia Drive, you can see how hot it is. And that's because these are all recent transactions, or relatively recent. And if you go in town closer to the center around J and K Street, that's a development that happened around 1930, much older transactions, and therefore you see a lot lower value. So it's not the fault of the architecture, it's just the coincidence or the happenstance of Prop 13 that if you have an older transaction, it's going to matriculate slower than the recent transactions. But these guys that have been recent transactions, those people are in those houses, they're not going to move out. So that's going to stay capped at that rate. But we went ahead and ran what's the potential market value for those J and K streets versus Julia. So pulling a Zillow estimate, or Zestimate as they call it. So what would it transact for if people were to just all at once just like move out and new people moved in? There's actually a market potential that neighborhood is 53% of its existing market potential. So there's room for growth in your older neighborhoods. And that's, you know, you just have to be cautious of displacement or pushing people out. That's not fair. But there will be a natural transition as people age out of their housing or their needs change. And they just choose different housing. But that's an opportunity, and that's what you're already seeing. Actually, let's just go back here for a second. You can kind of see throughout the old part of your neighborhood, you see the oranges and the red ones popping in, and they're right next to yellow, like actually right here where the cursor is showing you that you're already seeing Prop 13 transactions with yellow, oranges, and red right next to the little green ones down here, if you can see my cursor. So that just gives you the idea that there's an opportunity for that to happen over time. The thing is, this project, the Resca, the renovation, Resaka, sorry. This is This is a $2.3 million renovation. Let's see, we should have it highlighted in here. So if you could see in here, so this is when we started the project, the renovation hadn't kicked in yet. It pulled an average value of 532, so it's actually down in the mix in here in El Centro. So 532, so after it renovated, boom, it jumped up to here. It's now one of the top producers, $13 million of value per acre. So that's a huge jump just by rehabbing the property. So think of that, and also what it does is it gives this property another 100 years of value production in your community. So to go from 532 to 2.3 million, or sorry, 13 million an acre is a very big jump. So that was pretty cool. Another thing we can do is fees. If you did a road fee, what would that be per month? So we ran the numbers, taking your $5 million of unmet road needs, your deficit right here, this $5 million, divided just straight against all houses in your community, that's 7,000 houses. That would equal about $700 a year or $60 a month. That's like a cable bill. You know, if we were to recommend something like this, we would recommend that you think of it geospatially. The people that consume more of the road infrastructure at the edges should be paying a higher level. But this is just averaging it out, just to show you the scale of what people owe for their infrastructure. Roads aren't free. You know, there isn't some magic fairy that shows up and pays for them. So they have to be paid for one way or another. And this shows you the scale of deficit that you're in. It'd be $60 a month per household citywide. The other option is reduce your road costs. Now you can do this by taking some roads out at the edge that just are ancillary, let them cycle out, let them just decay. You could also go on a road diet. You can actually think of the horizontal width of your road and trim it in a little bit. Maybe there's not a real need for all that traffic volume. You can reduce the road width. You already have this recommendation in your Main Street plan to do something like this. So roads have costs with length of roads. They also have cost with width. That per square foot cost is a cost. You could do things like remove a lane and plant trees to get some shade on the sidewalks, or increase impervious surface. There's lots of things you could do, but this is a trend that we see in a lot of cities. Your streets aren't as wide as we've seen in like Rancho Cucamonga or in Utah. Their streets are ridiculous. But still, it's find ways to think of every square foot of asphalt as a cost, and how do you reduce it? You've got to take a multi-pronged approach to this. And then finally, you can pick it up and add buildings.
We did that. That was like 12 years ago.
So, if you can see this bar chart here, one of the things that we did is, Josh told your sort of like this history of your Main Street. It is kind of fun to see the dirt roads. Maybe your great grandparents knew something back then about the cost of asphalt. That's a joke. But anyhow, yeah.
That's not me standing there. Sorry. Not me standing there.
They took that picture?
But, this is you by the 1930s. You popped out the population, but you built a pretty strong street here with buildings on it and parking areas in front. And then, so what do we have? Josh, if I can, the axis here, this is just a population growth, right? I've got this right, yeah. And then this is your population kind of flattens. So even though it's flat, you still have a strong downtown. Now you're getting more two-story buildings, 12,000 population. And then here you are in the 1970s. What's kind of interesting, even though you're suburbanizing, you still have this healthy, strong downtown. And here you are now. So through this time period, you can see where your population has a couple of different waves to it, and then kind of a period of stagnation through World War II and into the 90s. So you actually have been growing population, as you know. but your downtown hasn't seen a commensurate growth in the core as much as your edge of your community.
Like
And-
most of this time?
Let's see, you just kind of jump ahead. There's some lessons that we learned in Lancaster. They have enough roads to go from Los Angeles to Portland. They have a lot more roads than you do, which is insane. And then we cycled them in a timeline to show when they were built. So if you look at these 1950 or 1953 roads, they got their first cycle of build in blue here. And they had to come back and got rebuilt in 1983. And then in 1983, they built more development and got more roads. So if you look at the first wave in blue and the second wave in red, this is what it looks like. And you could see that first wave was a really big spike. They added a lot of roads in a really short window after World War II. And then they went ahead and doubled down on it in the 1980s. They basically doubled their liability. And we stopped them. We didn't add another road from 2016 going forward. And you could see how it's starting to capitalize on stuff. What this chart doesn't show, we didn't put inflation in this, nor did we put the price of asphalt. Asphalt's growing at 5 to 7% a year in cost. So if it's bad enough just looking at the area, it's worse when you add in the economics of cost. And they can only afford 50% of their roads, which is not good. We recommended some of the roads out in the desert, just let them go. Have a different strategy in the downtown. And also we put a price on cul-de-sacs. When you think about cul-de-sacs are not streets. They should not be public infrastructure because they're not helping transportation. They're effectively glorified driveways. So if you look at this property, this little cluster of property right here, you have 5 people that have a little city stub right here. Is that serving the entire community? No. So why should the entire community pick up the bill? Or let's have a vote on what it's going to cost and let's vote to subsidize it. But when you look at the network, they have a lot more cul-de-sacs and dead ends. They have about 10% of their network. But that equates to $2.5 million a year they're paying for that. And this is one of the recommendations we made to them, which is you probably shouldn't pay that for that anymore. If you can't afford your system, you've got to make sacrifices somewhere and allow those to just convert to a condo fee or something and let the owners that use them as their driveway pay for it. You're going to have to make tough choices, and this is maybe a way to do that. Moving on to land value analysis. I don't know if you remember I showed you this. This is Cheyenne, Wyoming. So one of the things that's great with the data is that we can turn off the buildings and just look at the dirt value per acre. So you can see this neighborhood up here in blue is all the same kind of color, so everybody's got the same dirt value. But you notice things like this where this dirt under the mall is 15,000, it's blue, and when you cross the street it doubles. There are weird quirks baked into the way tax policy or assessment methodologies work. And basically there's this rule of thumb that they have where the more land you have, the lower the value, which is an interpretation we don't agree with, but most assessors do use that. And what it does is it's a function to subsidize large tracts of land. So just be aware of that and have a conversation with your county assessor about it. But we went ahead and ran your land value per acre. So there's no buildings here, and you can clearly see where the cities are versus the farms when you look at the land value per acre. And you can see as you come into your city, probably what's notable is look at the Walmart right here, dirt value per acre compared to the out parcels right next to it. So your assessor is actually giving Walmart a break because it happens to be a large parcel. Have a conversation with them about that. It's kind of funky. It could be because of when the land transacted. That could be why these are hotter, but it's usually that methodology that they use. And it's worth the conversation. When you look into the core of your city, again, you're going to want to do this based on date too, but you can see how the dirt is kind of all over the place in your community. But it's mostly to show you because we were able to do this, so we went ahead and made these for you anyway. So to close, you know, we have a mantra: if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we've given you a lot of data. I want to apologize for the technical glitch. But this is, you know, Michael Bloomberg's a billionaire for a reason. The guy understands money and numbers, and he's a solid business person, and he was a mayor.
It's a mantra
But when
that's
we talk
used
to
often with
cities,
a lot
there's
of.
a lot of emotional things that we talk about, but you have to start with the things that you can measure first, and then we get into the quality of life issues. But the way out of this is, just to close, thicken up on your existing infrastructure. Find those parcels. This is a really simple CAT scan where you can see it. You know, they're in and around your downtown. They might not even be on Main Street. It might be a block off or a block or two off. But find parcels where you can work with people. Think about that parking lot that you have as an opportunity. Pay attention to your risk, and this is the harbinger of that. This was a risk, and you're stuck with it at this point. So pay attention to new risk as it comes in. Learn about this, watch this, and inform your citizens about what happened there. Account for the true life cycle. Don't just look at what you have, the bills that you have to pay today. Think about how this stuff operates as a life cycle and what you should be saving as a reserve account for future payments. You know, in business, like in our business, we have to set aside money to keep as a rainy day fund for like COVID, or if we don't have contracts, we still have to pay our salaries, pay rent. We also have things like this computer that I'm on that I need to replace every 2 or 3 years. So I need to save money to do that. Cities are more complicated versions of that. And roads and pipes, you need to accrue that. Just going and taking out bonds every time is an easy infusion of cash. But let's think of it a different way. Should I have to take out a mortgage on my house once I pay my mortgage off? No, I should, but I still have to repair things. I still have to fix the roof. I still have to paint it. So those are still costs that I have in my house, even though I've paid it off. Think of your roads that same way. You don't want to keep on going into bond cycles because you'll never catch up. Use it for a short-term infusion or to meet a gap, but you really need to think about this deficit pretty hard, this $5 million deficit. Leverage your assets. You have plenty of assets. You have a lot of great examples of buildings in your community that have actually produced wealth for generations. Your neighbors in the communities around you also have lessons that you can replicate. So use that. And then finally, I guess for your community, one of the things that really stuck out for us is learn from history and plant seeds for your grandkids. And because your great-grandparents have done this for you in these buildings. So these are some buildings, you've got them all over your downtown and in your community and also in your county that have been around for generations that just keep on giving you money. And they don't have to be torn down to do that. So these are architectural lessons you can learn from. And just to close, we just went ahead and ran your numbers. Your county is, if you just cashed it out, it's $12.5 billion of taxable value, which is about almost 5 Chargers. You could buy half a Los Angeles Chargers if you sold Brawley.
That's a good investment.
That might be a good idea.
But as a joke, you know, it's just, what I always tell people is like our parent company is a real estate developer, and I can tell you that the cups in the nightclub cost 5 cents per cup. I can guarantee you that the Gettys know Justin Herbert's towel bill. You know, we know these numbers in business because we have to keep ourselves in business. So cities are no different. We have to, all of those numbers that I gave you today, they have to be at your forefront of your conversations as you go forward. And then our attitude, and just to close, we call this geo-accounting. This isn't a values statement. This isn't judging you. This is just putting numbers on a piece of paper or a map so that you can see it. Like your accountant doesn't care if you buy a boat or a Jeep or a dune buggy. Your accountant cares if you can afford it. So these are conversations to continue. I want to thank you for this and letting us make some maps and letting us do some math for you all. I can stop sharing and questions or if you want me to go back to the images.
One, two, three.
Three.
That's like a drink from a fire hose, Joe, but that's a lot of good information. I know you said that it was somewhat incomplete because of some data that you were still needing from the county tax assessors, but it was still very informative, and it gives us a lot of food for thought for future development, and I think it's something that we've all talked about and agreed here on council, that infill is going to be our friend in the years to come. But any other questions or comments from council?
Yeah, you mentioned you were missing some data. Can you specify what that data is?
Josh, I'm going to turn that one over to Josh.
Yeah, hi, I'm Josh McCarty. The two things that we specifically wanted to get from the assessor that we weren't able to were the taxability status of property. So usually what we get in the data is the official exemption amount. So we know for sure what is in and is not taxable. We did a pretty good job of figuring that out ourselves. But we really wanted to know that for sure. And the other one was either the year built or the year of transaction, so that we could more accurately map the Prop 13 effect. Because I have a strong hunch that that's having a big impact on your model. It looks different from what we expected to find, or what we expect to find in other communities.
Is there a reason for that? Did the county specify, did they say why they couldn't provide that information? Or just
He did, and the short answer is pandemic. That he just he's having a shortage with his GIS capabilities, and so basically told me the information was there, but he didn't have the hand to get it at the time.
And is there a timeline, or do you know when they're going to get that information to you? Can we expect in the next 3 months, 6 months?
He did not. So the way we left it is I'm happy to be the sort of middleman and the communicator to try to fit the pieces together. But I kind of went as far as I was able to get anything from him.
Yeah, that might be something that with interest and pressure from other cities in the county, that they might be able to put some extra hands on that task.
Mr. Mayor, just overall, I thought the presentation was very good. I mean, a lot of the information I've seen in different presentations throughout the years, but this really put it together, and the information shared was valuable, with respect to, just the roads, the cost, the tax-producing properties. It leads me to other questions, but they won't be answered tonight. But it's still valuable information for us here on council.
Yeah, we're going to have to look at that.
Yeah, definitely. To have the data in front of us as much as we have anyway is going to be very helpful for just, at a glance, when developers come with their stories of what their benefits will be for our community. I think having this historic data will be very helpful with those negotiations.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just a quick comment. I took a lot of notes and look forward to, as we keep moving on, of, obviously provoking a lot of good questions here. Joe, I think as you mentioned, there's a portion of this that's meant to be informative, and I think as you mentioned, another part of it that really, I think kind of opens up additional questions and a lot that we can dig into and dive deep on. I'm assuming that this is aggregating multiple data sets that kind of populate this model. I can only imagine how many inputs are going into it, but my assumption also is if we do come up with questions that may weren't addressed in the presentation of the study, I assume we can come back and potentially get those answered if I assume the data's there. It's kind of been aggregated, and if there's some areas that we really kind of put some emphasis on for upcoming decisions. I'm assuming we can come back to that. I think that's what you mentioned, Joe, in the initial presentation. This is, you know, in some ways a little bit of a living model and document subject to evolving and changing.
Well, if we get the data, I guess I'm gonna have to defer to Josh on how much time it would take to modify.
And I think there's two pieces there. One is please do accumulate those questions, and you know we'll definitely want to see them either way. And then for the most part, I'm pretty confident in the data we have, and it's very sufficient to answer questions. And we're going to provide that back. You know, we've improved what we got from the assessor, and it's public data, and it's your data, so
Yep.
there'll be that too. But for the most part, yeah, we'll be able to answer questions. The data is I don't want to make it seem like it's more incomplete than it is. What we're able to do is we check what we get in the GIS data against the budget and the annual financial report, and we know that what we have is more than 99% accurate to that. So it's pretty good. We just want to make sure they're missing
Yeah.
of the connection to the assessor.
It's basically, there was a couple of data points that didn't let us run a couple maps.
Yeah.
But it's like, we've delivered you a car, it's got bumpers, it's got hubcaps, we just don't know where the doorknobs are. You know, it's just, we're just missing some pieces. I did put in the chat the Council of Infill Builders, which is an organization of developers that look for opportunities of infill. They're basically, if they have willing communities that want buildings, they know how to get them done. So there's a group of developers that have bonded together, and they're willing to do that stuff in California. If there's questions that you all have, I know that this is a lot of information. I do these shows, and I know that there are a lot of information. So if you have questions that you're going to percolate, yeah, we're more than happy to answer them. Howard knows how to get a hold of us. Josh is on the West Coast in Portland, and we can answer what we can.
Hey, Joe, you mentioned one term here. You said 1.2 billion in taxable value. Does that mean that there are other properties you're in this study? It doesn't include properties that, for example, are tax exempt?
1.2 billion. Are you talking about your total taxable value?
Yeah, you said 1.2 billion taxable value. Is that like every property, every building, every piece of land in the city?
Yes, sir. It's what's taxable. So it's actually 2.6 billion. Let me pull it up for the city. So if you just think of it this way, you can actually get from the county a full spreadsheet of the entire county and pull it into Excel, and you're going to see value down the whole thing. What they'll do is they'll put value in it. Even non-taxable property has a value, but then they have they have another column that's called an exemption code, and so it'll be like, let's say it's number 3 if it's a city building, it's number 6. If it's a county building, it's number 9. If it's a church or something like that. And the computer knows to turn off the value when they run the tax bills. It's basically a big tax bill. But if you take everything that is a taxpayer and just hit sum at the bottom of it, you're worth 2.6 billion. If you add in the cost of your roads, you know, that's another, what was it? Did Josh figure it out? 8 billion?
So we have that listed as an asset or a liability?
You have it listed as an asset, and it's really a liability. But it's typical of financial documents to list it as assets. But really, it's look at your depreciation schedule, and that's going to tell you what your cost is. So that's what you owe on that thing forever. So
It's gonna be a
another way to
cost
think of
forever,
it
it's
is,
not like-
what I'm showing you on the screen right now is just your taxable value. If you added up the cost of City Hall, the cost of all the roads, the cost of all the pipes, you want to have more taxable value than your liabilities, right? So that's one of the things to maybe think is a rule of thumb. Right now, most cities don't look at that. They're the opposite. They have more liability in the ground than their taxable value, which is kind of weird that we do that. But I think a lot of it is just the practices of municipal finance have always kept these things in silos this way. But I would want to know what the total value of all my streets and pipes and water systems and all that is a cost, and put it next to this number of value. But right now, this is what your taxable value is.
Joe, to expand on the streets as a liability, I believe I was on, it's been a few months, but on a webinar with you and some others, and there's been conversation with our governing accounting board for GASB to try to get them to for lack of to re-quantify that's the like streets, for example, right? But it's kind of stonewall at this point, is what I remember. But
well, the reason why is that organization is run by people that have bond companies.
Yep.
And it's not in their incentive to be true about that, because they want to be able to show out a lot of
They
money
show it as an asset.
to
It's
cities
crazy,
and put them on the hook.
Wow.
So it's like, do you let a pawn shop dictate the terms on your checking account? Why do we do that with bonds? So I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the way that Gatsby makes their rules. But the thing is, though, is let them make the rules all they want. You can have a standard for communicating to your citizens why things are the way that they are. And that's something we actually, the Government Finance Officers Association, Shane Kavanaugh, we've been talking with him a lot. He actually produced a series of books on municipal first aid. The GFOA has been great. They understand that Gatsby is doing their own thing, but Gatsby's, it's a bunch of bond people. There's no incentive for them to change the way that they're behaving.
Any other comments or questions from council members?
Yeah, I think I want to see one more item. I mean, maybe later on in a few months, if this can be added, just kind of a breakdown of the entire value of the city, even when it's non-taxable, even if it's just in a chart to show us what it is, even like, property that the city might own that's just sitting there, like the old water treatment plant, and, perhaps we can do something with that. I think it'd be interesting to see that as well, not just what's taxable, but what's not being taxed.
I'm going to show you.
Right, yeah, I saw that. I wanted to see it as far as value, adding a dollar amount to it, I guess, a dollar figure.
Yeah, we've done those. I think, they're called public asset valuations or wealth funds. One of the things you could do is you could hang on to the land and work with the developer to put something taxable on top of it.
And lease the land.
And get rent off of it, basically, and also taxes. So there might be, that big surface parking lot in the downtown.
Or the old water treatment.
People may complain.
We're
and say,
meeting with a
"Free
developer
parking
next
everywhere,"
week.
but it's, the response is like, well, you also don't have money. You can't afford a bunch of free parking everywhere. Right on the street. I don't know. I mean, this is the next level of conversations. Those are great questions, and that's where you should be going. What can you work on?
Is there any question or comment from anyone in the public, in the audience?
The Government Finance Officers Association just did a webinar on public asset valuation. We also did one on our website that we can send you the link to that talks about how to do exactly what we just talked about. But reach out to the Government Finance Officers Association, but we can also send you our video that we did. That's free. I'll make sure you get a link to that.
Great.
we're a member of GFOA.
Good. Any comments from the public?
Good evening. Tom DeBose Design Group. I really appreciate Tyler giving me the heads up of this presentation. And I know that we may all walk away with different opinions of what we just saw and heard. And we'll have to digest that and kind of go through. But One thing immediately comes to mind is I'm looking forward to a subdivision standard in Brawley maybe changing to where 40-foot wide streets are no longer necessary. Maybe they're 36 or something less. Policies and those kinds of things drive a lot of that. And I think this will be helpful in maybe having us take a look at what really works. The other comment I'll make is that, yes, improving the infill is your friend, but you can't do that without giving it an incentive. And I would suggest that prior management policies, practices, theories, opinions of infill first or infill only didn't quite work either. And so I think it's going to take a nice little mix. We have a presentation I think we'll be able to make to you on Tuesday with a lot of positive things that I think not only you as a council have been able to do, maybe unrecognized, but new things that are coming into the community that are going to change a lot of that. For instance, the subdivision example that was given that's costing you a lot of money, that's going to change here really soon because you've got building permits pulled now. And the reason that happened isn't really anyone's fault. It isn't the developers. It's not the cities. It just happened. That's what happened to the economy. How do we manage that going forward? Yeah, maybe we don't record maps like we did for a while. But, you know, development was booming. I remember our large subdivision that we did in El Centro, and the largest map that we'd ever recorded at one time was 20 to 30 lots. It got up to 50 lots. And we had a 465 lot subdivision, and the market demand was so hot, we recorded all 465 lots. But it also built out in 2 years and sold homes, and people were living there. So, look, it's a fine line. I think the development community overall will work with you. I think they're hoping to work with you. I know the projects that we'll be presenting to you that are, again, I think going to do some very good things for Brawley, are going to be good for the city. But for this infill growth that you're looking at, it needs an incentive. And we've grown in population, but we haven't grown in any other way. And so finding a way to do that, I think, is what we're going to need to do. There's an opportunity for Brawley, and this is, again, what we're going to talk about on Tuesday, to change what was presented tonight about the export of people who live here to go elsewhere to work. And we have an opportunity with all of the things coming up on the north end, geothermal, the mineral mining, the biofuels, where people aren't going to be driving, unfortunately like I do every day, to my office in El Centro. They're going to be driving from where they live, we hope that's in Brawley, to the north. And so when they come home, they're not going to be going by the Target in El Centro. They're going to want a new Target in Brawley. And so, anyway, we really appreciate that. I think this is good information, but I'll just, again, leave you with, if you want to do that infill development, it needs some incentive.
Thank you for your comments, Tom.
Thanks.
Mark Hamby, resident of Brawley. I want to commend you on this report. It's really deep. There's a lot there, and I hope that you'll give the residents and citizens of Brawley a chance to digest this and come back and have 2, maybe 3 meetings again for people to come in and ask questions. This is a very complex subject, and it deserves a lot of review. I have my own opinions, but everyone else is entitled to theirs too, and I hope that they're invited to participate. The residents and citizens often in cities and towns in California are disregarded and not listened to, and I hope that everyone has an opportunity to sound off or make their opinions known. We often are more concerned about the people that are going to come than the ones that are already here. And I want to see at least an even consideration for the people that already live here before the new people are considered. That's a really important thing if you want quality of life. And there's also a lot of impact on schools and quality of schools. And those are things that cause people to want to live in your community. I do have a couple of questions. I don't think you're capable, I don't think it's possible to answer them. But I would, one of the things with California's Prop 13, I don't think in this study it's possible to come up, at least here, with a present value for the entire town's property. And I do have one other question on tax-exempt properties like low-income housing and city properties and such. I'd like to see a total value on tax-exempt properties, present value. Because you can have a value of a property that's sold in 1950 that's passed through a family all that time, and you have a value that's very small compared to the one next door that traded last year. So there's impacts in the entire tax system that are hard to compute, and I don't know how exactly you do that. But I would say that your value per acre will trigger a review of their present values. Anyway, thank you very much for having commissioned this study. There's so much here, and I hope you'll come back and have 2 or 3 workshops on this so that we can digest it. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Mayor, if I may, I've got, that's a great question. And that example that we showed of J Street versus Julia Drive, and maybe I didn't, I was going pretty fast, but we just went, Josh grabbed the Zillow estimates that should be reflective of current market conditions. He just did a sample in those 2 areas, but you could theoretically do the whole city that way. It could be kind of tedious. I'll talk with Josh to see if we can get the what it would take to get the full data set from Zillow. But that would be the easiest way to do it, because it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be like horseshoes. It'll be a little close, you know. But it is. You do have different measures and props that stifle the true effect of your real estate. From the non-taxable stuff, you know, like I said, if we get that data from the county, that would be helpful to show some of that. Though we should have some ways to figure out those numbers that the gentleman just raised. Those are great questions.
thank you, Joe. Another comment?
Yes, hello. My name is Juan Carlos Mercado, and this is my first time here. Thank you for the invitation, Councilman Castro. And the tangible that I want to mention that somehow it's not part of the presentation today, and I don't know if it was done on purpose or it's just not. Somehow we can add it to it. And tourism, I think you know, we got cattle call, entertainment. I don't know if I think that's something that could be tapped into, you know, that we can maximize even more. And, you know, and my roots are in the valley, even though now, you know, home is El Cajon. But I think that's something that's missing out of today, you know, somehow. I don't know how that happened. But I think we can, you know, I don't know what the sports is like here in Brawley, but I know there's cattle call and tourism and entertainment. And I think that's something that hasn't been, that by far has not been maximized. Mm-hmm. And that's something that, you know, we need to pursue that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Joe, is that, when you analyzed Asheville and you talk about their tourism market, is that something that you add in somehow to the value that you give your city?
Well, I mean, you're going to see effects. You're going to see you're going to see transactions in retail sales, sales tax. You do have the ability to look at individual retailers. We can't because we're your consultant. But if you ask for it, you can look at it with through the state's consultant. We don't have that ability in North Carolina. I can't tell you, we couldn't make that retail sales tax map that we made for you is illegal in North Carolina. But what you can do is you can see those events that happen. You can look at them in a micro way and see what happens from a sales tax standpoint at those events.
You can get some information on that.
You should be able to see that. Now, that's a much more micro detailed way of looking at this than what we did. We're looking at the larger sales tax over a year, the property taxes, which is the majority of, which is a large size of share of your budget. So we're looking at that as a cash flow, which is the physical characteristics of your city. You know, like it's apples. I'm trying to think like looking at Asheville's tourism, or let's say Charleston, which is over on the coast. In South Carolina, we were able to get their data, and the city of Charleston produces 1% of all of the state's retail sales just in the little city because of tourism. But they have which is a mind-blowing statistics, but they also have hundreds of restaurants. Just Asheville, we're 90,000 people. We have 150 restaurants downtown, 40 breweries in our city. That we're also a day's drive from half the United States population. So you don't have those assets in your community. So it's going to be different. I'm not saying we don't look at it, but just it's a more micro grain thing. But the gentleman does raise a good question. Do look at those events. Do look at things that happen, and see what they're producing. Try to have more events. You know, try to shoot for at least once a quarter in your city, but try to shoot for a downtown event once a month. I used to be on our downtown association board, and we used to have like a street party once a month. And for our nonprofit, it raised like $250,000 a year, which maintained an executive, but it also made the streets alive. We had people downtown coming to see live music and be part of the city. So you can't actually, those events will stimulate development in your community. Have a Main Street event. Sorry, Josh just corrected me. It wasn't all of Charleston, it was just downtown Charleston.
Wow.
1%.
1%. Amazing.
Yeah, but Charleston has a history.
Yeah, but it's just, you know, those transactions actually do show up in the sales tax data. They're just, you know, they're washed into a year in those locations.
Great. Well, we really appreciate the presentation. I think this particular council is, we're looking to be data-driven as far as the decisions that we make. And this was a big step in that direction. And we appreciate all the work that your firm did, knowing that it was probably a little more complicated than it should have been or than you expected, but we really do appreciate all the data that you were able to compile in a way that's easy to understand, especially with all the maps and the graphs.
Thank you. Well, now you have it, so you can share some of the PDFs with your friends in the different cities. Have a conversation with the assessor on why you need this information to see it. So this will be helpful that the graphics are done out. And thank you for giving us this opportunity. We hope we've helped.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay.
So, well, just real quick, Armando, our IT manager, just reminded me that to Mr. Hamby's point about the citizens digesting it, and there is an opportunity to view it on Facebook, and the Zoom presentation will come in better than our actual live or our post meeting recording on the website. You'll be able to hear and see the graphics better if you use Facebook Live, and it's on there for viewing in the future. So just to let everybody know.
Okay. Thank you. If there's nothing else, we will call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.